Well, hey there. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see and hear, please subscribe and hit that bell button. Warning: everything you're about to see and hear comes from newspaper articles, court transcripts, and interviews with those involved. Thank you for watching. The case against Lemaricus Davidson would be similar to that of his brother. DNA evidence showed that Davidson had raped Channon Christian. Prosecutors said he was the ringleader. Her body was discovered in his house. His prints found on the garbage bag containing her body. The bullets found in Chris's body may have been fired from Davidson's high-standard revolver. The gun possessed by Cobbins had been ruled out as the murder weapon. It was looking bad for the defense, but they had a few tricks up their sleeve. In a last-ditch effort, the defense would attempt to point the finger at the gang from Kentucky, and defense attorney David Eldridge tried to persuade the jury that Davidson and Channon had consensual sex. Semen was found on the crotch area of Shannon's pants. The defense wanted the jury to believe that Channon put her pants back on after consensual sex. They would attempt to call a former friend of Davidson, Susan Hill. Her testimony supposedly could have confirmed a prior link to Davidson and one of the victims. She was afraid to testify on Davidson's behalf. Those that did had received death threats, and that was a risk she just wasn't willing to take. What did she know? Could she shed more light on the murders? We may never know. Either way, the goal for the defense was to prove that Channon and Chris visited Davidson to buy drugs. The jury, well, they just weren't buying it. They ultimately found Davidson guilty of the crimes. Lemaricus Davidson's life was in the hands of the Knox County jury. Would he live or die? During the penalty phase, the jury would learn about Davidson's mother, a crack addict. They would also hear from a foster family that cared for Davidson for about a year. They said that he thrived in their care, but they were forced to kick him out when he wouldn't stop smoking marijuana. The family would plead for mercy from the jury, mercy that Lemaricus Davidson would not get. He would not flinch when the jury sentenced him to death for the murders of Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom. Davidson insisted on having a Knox County jury, and that likely came back to haunt him in the end. Would things have been different if the foster family would have ignored his dope smoking habits, or was Lemaricus Davidson just evil from birth? George Thomas would be the next to go on trial. The prosecution would have an uphill battle on its hands. The jury would be brought in from Hamilton County. There was no forensics evidence or eyewitness testimony. However, George's own words would put him in the house at the time of the rapes and murders. The prosecution laid out his case just like it had twice before. One of the most damning pieces of evidence against Thomas was a recorded call between him and girlfriend Stacy Lawson. The call showed that Thomas wasn't asleep during the assault on Channon. He was able to tell his girlfriend exactly which room she was kept in. When asked why he never helped the couple, he said, "Should've, would've, could've, but didn't." Despite being no real physical evidence to pin the crimes on Thomas, he would be found guilty by the jury. That same jury would need to decide whether Thomas would get the ultimate punishment. In the end, he would be sentenced to life without parole. The trial of Vanessa Coleman would be different. Like the rest of the suspects, the only female defendant would be facing the death penalty. The main difference was Kentucky attorney Theodore Lavitt, who had been hired by family to represent Coleman. The prosecution attempted to get rid of Lavitt from the very beginning by claiming that he was not qualified to handle a capital case in Tennessee. They said that his presence would allow the case to get overturned. Judge Richard Baumgartner would allow him to defend Coleman. The defense had Coleman's past immunity deal on its side, and there was no evidence showing that Coleman was involved in the rapes or torture. She was there, but to what extent she partook in the murders was unknown. She would face a Nashville jury consisting mainly of middle-aged women. As for the prosecution, it had Vanessa's grand jury testimony, putting her in the house, and her journal. 2 days after Newsom and Christian went missing, Coleman left the following entry. "I've had one hell of an adventure since I've been in the Big TN." She also made references to the crackhead who drove them back to Kentucky. At the end of the journal, she wrote, "How interesting is your life? I bet it won't compare to mine, 'cause I love my life." Jurors were not allowed to hear testimony that would show Coleman was aware that Davidson had committed a home invasion and had robbed a subway just days before the abduction. The defense used Coleman's parents to show that Coleman was initially a witness and was arrested without warning. Prosecutors claimed that Coleman was with Channon when the Waste Connections worker saw 4 men in the Forerunner. Lavitt refuted the claim, suggesting that it was Newsom who was in the car. In the end, it would be a big win for the defense. For every count relating to the murder of Christopher Newsom, Coleman would be deemed not guilty. As for the counts involving Christian, they would select the lesser crime of facilitation. The Newsom family would later say that they had been cheated. "There will never be peace. There will never be closure." Vanessa Coleman's father wasn't satisfied either. He would say, "I think the system failed her from the beginning." Judge Richard Baumgartner would later sentence Coleman to 53 years. Would things have been different for the others had they been represented by paid lawyers and not public defenders? On the next episode. And Judge Richard Baumgartner was about to throw the defendants a lifeline. The public would later throw blame at the Knox News Sentinel. The public wasn't going to let the Knox News Sentinel off so easy. Chris's father would get in touch with Latavis Cobbins in hopes of convincing him to testify against Eric Boyd.